Hello and welcome to the Badger channel. My name is Wasabi Boat Research, and I'm talking today with fellow Badgers Tritium and Jonto. And we're talking about today a piece of content that Badger released on our website called the Badger Flywheel. And what that is kind of a big picture look at some of the changes that Badger has rolled out recently in response to some pretty radical developments in the landscape of how yield is generated and captured and traded and voted on and passed around in DeFi. And a lot of protocols have been trying to figure out new strategies for this, Badger included. And we have just released one of the biggest pieces of that, which we'll be talking about more today. So we're going to go through that. And let's just start off with Tritium. And then Jonto, can you give us a little intro to yourselves if people aren't familiar and what your main roles are at Badger?
Sure. So I'm Tritium. I just showed up in the community and has kind of been around since the beginning and slowly moved towards the team. At this point, I'm kind of coordinating everything technically. So I do a little bit of programming on some of the different projects, and then I'm mostly just kind of working to bridge everybody, the community, the team, the people that have product ideas, and bring that all together and keep us moving. I'm kind of administrating.
Yeah, and I guess I've got a similar path. I just came from the community as well. I was around a bit before launch and then around at launch. And started, I guess, was part of the original core team group that lit up in February that had all been kind of, contributing on grants for a couple months leading into that. I do not do any coding or development. I would say I'm more on the product and economics side of things. So, and, try to be pretty active with the community and things like that. So we've run office hours and work with the folks working on emissions and a lot of the tokenomics, boost mechanics, things like that. So yeah, that's where I fit in. And, I guess the, generator of some of the content for the Flywheel, that is, it's a collective of everyone kind of working together and a lot of different products kind of being built and then kind of culminating into, this new thing.
So Tritium, I'm going to throw it to you to sort of set the stage. I know you have been involved in several different yield farming projects or as a user or as working in Badger. So I wonder if you could kind of like set the stage for the different shifts that have happened and the major shift that's happened in the last, 6 months or so. How has the landscape changed since the first yield farming projects like Yearn and so forth came out, and what are we looking at now?
I mean, I think there's been like 5 whole evolutions, right? Things have changed so fast. But I think, 6 months ago, there were farms popping up. The whole thing is there would be an LM event. So if you were smart, you'd get in, you'd farm a bunch of these coins. Maybe you'd put a little bit in LP and then you'd get a bunch more. And then if you were smart, you figured out when to sell some of them, before the thing kind of went down the first time, which they almost always did, right? So you see tokens, they come, there's an LM event, everybody gets real excited, it goes way up, and then it goes...
LM, liquidity mining.
Liquidity mining. Yeah, so what I mean by that is protocols, when they launch, they tend to drop a whole bunch of tokens at the beginning to attract interest, right? And so I think a year ago, there was Yearn that was kind of farming the big protocols, right? And then the other side of it was Harvest and whatever, which was farming alpha liquidity coming from other protocols, right? And the real money to be made there was to be there, in the first week to make some smart moves with putting whatever that token was into LP and getting high emissions, and then to exit with, half of it at the right time to make big bags and then hang on to a Gov token, right? So I think the real pro-Deegan farmers of the last year have been through that a few times, right? They've increased their bags. They've got a bunch more cash. And then they've also got these leftover Gov tokens that they won through the process of farming it. I think more and more those LM events aren't as juicy, right? It's been a long time since there was a Badger, Vesper, I guess recently, but where somebody really printed a bunch of money and it held and stuck for a long time. I guess Spell is kind of doing that now, right? But those plays have gotten a lot more complicated. And then at the same time, it's Yearn has attracted a lot more capital, right? A lot more of the yield farming has moved towards Curve. And so Curve was always like this pretty stable yield farm. You knew there were all these gauges. You could see what the yields are. It was like very predictable, right? And that allowed like companies or, people like Yearn that wanted to provide like, like a blue chip kind of standard service to do that. And it also kind of allowed, a lot of protocols kind of built up on Curve. Then very recently, Curve released.
Can I stop you there for 1 sec? So let's just like explain what Curve is and why, like how you would farm something in Curve. So let me give you my explanation. Sure. Tell me if this is right or not. So Curve they started out as a stablecoin swap platform, and they have a mechanism where you can swap between a stablecoin like USDC and USDT at extremely low slippage in a much lower slippage and more efficient trade than like a Uniswap or a Sushi swap,
and
right?
for much lower fees, right?
And for much, yeah. So it's cheaper. And so they have become kind of like the granddaddy of stablecoin swaps. And then that moved into stuff like Bitcoin, different varieties of Bitcoin like WBTC and RenBTC. And this is the point where like Badger started getting interested in this world, right?
Right. So I think Curve had rent pools before Badger started. So, but yeah, like Badger has always, since day zero, Curve has traditionally been one of the better sources for stable yields for Bitcoin and for dollars. And so Badger's always farmed them, right? And that has always kind of been like one of the like foundations of what we farm, right? Other than Curve, there's actually not all that much. These M-stable vaults will farm more, and the Yearn vault farms a little more. And then like we've got some Sushi vaults that aren't pure Bitcoin, but that's where most of our native Bitcoin yields come from. So the Curve system is quite brilliant in that what the Curve token is good for is voting on the emission of Curve tokens. And so every 2 weeks, there's a vote where all of the Curve tokens vote, and then that determines Curve voting. For a very long time, most of and only the locked Curve, I should say. So we'll get into that for a minute. But in order to vote with Curve and Convex, you have to lock your tokens. So what that kind of meant was that the reason that things were staying stable is because there were some very big players like Yearn and then the Curve team that had a lot of locked Curve and were voting with it, right? So then the Curve team actually launched Convex, and I think they said, like, how can we better monetize this, right? So Convex launched as kind of a partner supported by the Curve team. I think there were some guys from Curve that had this idea. And basically what they're doing is helping people farm the Curve, locking as much of it as possible, right? So helping people lock the Curve and then managing all of the benefits that come from that. And then releasing their own Convex token, which can be used to then control the voting with the Curve. So it's a little complicated, but basically over the last month or two, we went from a situation where there were like a few teams that were concerned about like stability and yield in DeFi making decisions about Curve emissions to an environment where, like people are going on Vodium and bribing a bunch of money and, where like yield is flying all over the place. And, like there's like $400,000 or more, I think, went into like the last 2 weeks of emissions. So just placing like bribes on like who's going to vote for what. And so, I mean, I don't know if you want me to stop. Am I getting too far into your narrative?
No, this is good. So let me kind of like try to sum it up. So yield farming on Curve, you're depositing into pools that are swapping, and those pools have different ROIs. And what determines that ROI is how much CRV, the Curve token, is emitted. And how that's determined is I'm not sure exactly how often, but every 2 weeks, there's a vote called the gauge weight vote. And people who have locked their CRV tokens in Curve are voting. And then on top of that, you have Convex, which launched and gave people an additional token, the CVX token. And in order for staking their Curve LP tokens, right? So they're getting this new token, and that is essentially controlling. So each Convex token controls a certain number of Curve tokens.
10 lock Curve right now, I think, right? I think 10 lock Curve. And I think the other thing that just to throw this in, the important thing here to think about, although maybe like our users don't need to worry about it, is you have to lock the tokens a bunch of times, right? So you have to lock the Curve to vote with it, and then you have to manage locking, and you have to manage voting on Curve, and then you have to lock the Convex to vote with it. And so one of the things that all of these levels of protocols are doing is like handling the locking for you, handling the voting, and saying like, we're going to handle everything you need to handle to maximize the revenue off this locked asset, which has like time sensitive things. And then in our case, what we're saying is in return, like, we're going to vote for you.
So the TLDR is that acquiring these locked Convex tokens gives Badger or any protocol a kind of leverage over one of the like base layers of yield in DeFi, right? So you have Badger, you have other protocols that are doing everything they can right now to amass a significant share of these CVX tokens because that enables them to get better yields for their users.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Jonto, let's go to you. So there's this race to stack CVX. What's going on? What are other protocols doing? What's kind of like the new landscape that we're seeing now in this race?
Right. So the key about the curve emissions is that they're happening over a 4-year period. I think we're about a little over 1 year in. So there's still a lot of money on the table to fight over these next couple of years, and who knows how it'll persist after that. But for the next couple months, Convex, since they've accrued like almost 50% or something like that of the locked curve, it's a big player. And I think one of the underlying factors is a lot of people that like the system of curve, but don't necessarily care about where the rest of the curve gets emitted to. They're more than happy to put their vote weight up for sale. So I think there were a couple, whether they acquired it just because they liked the team and the project, or they kind of really knew what was coming. There's definitely been a number of whales and projects that have purchased good chunks of CVX to hold themselves. And then the landscape right now is there's a couple different ways you can actually bribe to not necessarily acquire CVX, but you can use whatever token you want to say, if you vote in the way that I would like you to vote, that can either be delegate to me and I'll vote, or just vote for these specific pools. It can be rewarded with some tokens, and that's done like per vote. So for example, Badger did a test this week last week for the last vote, where we put 1,000 Badger on the SBTC pool, and everyone that voted for that pool through the voting protocol, which is like the bribing protocol, they received a portion of that 1,000 Badger. So that's been kind of where a lot of the focus is now. People are locking up their Convex. There's different ways that you can, kind of leverage your Convex. You can lock it directly in Convex, and then there's voting mechanics behind how they vote to support their pools. Then you can use something like Vodium, where you can either delegate to another address to do voting, or you can vote directly yourself and earn bribes. And then there's a couple. It hasn't happened that much with Convex yet, I don't think, but it happened often with Curve, where the protocols can create a contract where you deposit your tokens and then they get locked, and then as soon as they unlock, they relock, and it basically creates this perpetual locking, and they pass through a lot of the earned rewards that happen that are emitted to locked token holders. That's another angle that like Urine famously did with like the YVE curve pool, where you put it in this contract, and it's just continually locked, and you'll never be able to withdraw it, but you'll continually get the protocol revenue that's Curve emits. And then they use it for voting is this kind of the trade-off. And we have launched a locked Convex vault that we just removed the cap from this week, and what that does is you deposit your Convex, you earn all the rewards you would from locking it and depositing at Convex itself. Plus you earn some Badger, and plus you actually earn more CVX Curve on top that we're accumulating in the treasury from performance fees on all the Convex vaults. So there's added rewards to come. Lock with Badger. Badger will use those to vote. This is not a perpetual locking. It is perpetual locking, but there's with Convex, there is a 1 week kind of grace period where we can still vote with the Convex while it's unlocked, and we'll use that to kind of have withdrawal capacity on it. So there will be some liquidity and ability to withdraw from it. But yeah, those are kind of the angles that people take. I guess you want to break it down. It's either just buying it, protocol buying it itself. They can bribe for it. They can launch a contract that you deposit to, and it auto locks that they can then add incentives on, and those are kind of like the main angles that you can take.
But I think we're the only ones that are doing a vault, right? One of the interesting with Convex is that we are consistently the only protocol that's like actually interacting at a deep level with them.
Mm-hmm. So Tritium, let me throw this to you. So we were chatting this morning a little bit. So obviously, at Badger, we've launched this vault. We're trying to get people to lock their CVX with us, and we'll get into the reason and why for that shortly. But we're trying to spend some time getting inside the heads of CVX holders and users. Some of them have already locked on CVX, or some of them have kind of free floating CVX. So what do you think, like the average CVX user, a holder, wants to do with their token? Like, do they want to be participating in this governance every so often, or do they want to kind of hands off, lock and forget about it type system? Or what are you seeing like when you're in the Discord and talking to users?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little complicated because I think Convex has like over $8 billion in revenue now, right? So there aren't necessarily average users, but if you think about the sorts of
$8 billion in TVL.
Sorry, TVL. Yeah, good point.
Right. So there's buckets probably. So what, like, do you think about it in certain buckets?
So I think the buckets are like protocols, right? So like Yearn is farming Convex, but they just sell it all. There's a bunch of people that are farming it, right? Like other protocols. There are people that just are yield hunting and they see it and they're like, I'm going to put money here because like it's the best place to put my money. And then there's the Convex community, which I think overlaps with the people that think it's the best place to put their money, right? So if you go in the Convex Discord, which is what I think I can talk the most about, right? Like these are like really smart people, right? They're very like economically minded and they understand the whole system and they're super excited about like how the yield environment is changing. And they kind of see it as like this game of 4D chess, as somebody else quoted, it was a good way to put it, that like DAOs are playing with each other, right? And if you have some pretty big bags, then you hold this Convex, there's all these bribes coming up. It's like you're just constantly pleasantly surprised by like what new people are willing to offer you to vote, right? And so I think the Convex people are looking at it and they're like, this is cool. This is fun. How long is this environment going to last, right? Like, are DAOs going to be paying more for bribes or less for bribes? And there's like a lot of talking about that, right? The other issue, though, is that it's kind of like, unless on ETH, which is where Convex is, unless you have a lot of money, right? The spell bribe that goes to every Convex holder for voting here, it's like you can get the bribes and you can maximize your return, but the return is in a whole bunch of different coins that you don't get very much of. So there's two kinds of Convex holder or, like fans, right? There's the Convex fan that's got a good chunk of cash, right? And has like a big chunk of Convex and is able to sit there and lock it and play that game and is trying to figure out, right, like the best deal and does it make sense to keep my agility and how do I do this? And I think the Convex holder that doesn't have that much Convex is sitting there going, man, there's like all of this stuff going on and I want to participate and I want to play this game, but like I actually can't do it by myself without going broke on gas fees.
Yeah. So what do you like? Do you have an estimate at what point, at what level of Convex holding does it make sense to kind of do it yourself versus doing like a lockup, given what gas fees are?
I mean, I really don't know. I don't understand these bribes yet, right? But like fundamentally, the most efficient thing that you could do, not gas included, would be to go and lock your Convex and then delegate it on Vodium, right? And then Vodium's going to vote in the most efficient way every time to get you the most rewards in like, I don't know, a bunch of different coins, right? And I think right now there's like 4 or 5 different coins in play, but like that, it's such a new thing that like, there's been 2 of these votes now with bribes, I think. So like it's changing so fast that like nobody's really sure. I'm definitely not sure. And I think like over time, as we vote more and we play with this more, like we'll be able to have a better understanding and be able to like better explain to the market exactly when and why this makes sense. But I do know there's a lot of people sitting there going, man, like I want to play, but I just can't.
Got it. Okay. So now we're getting to the part we call the F word with the flywheel. It's kind of like one of the most overused buzzwords in DeFi, but you can't avoid it in this case because I really do think it like makes a lot of sense and perfectly applies to what we're trying to do here. And it's almost like there's a flywheel that we're trying to like get in the middle of and pick up some momentum of. So John, you talked a little bit about the locked Convex vault for Badger, but could you kind of like give us a big picture? We're trying to attract this Convex. What are the sweeteners? What are the why are the reasons that we think this is going to be such an attractive place for Convex holders to just kind of park their Convex with us?
Right. So as I mentioned, obviously we want to make sure that all available yields and rewards that they would get elsewhere, that value is flowing back to the depositors to this vault. And that's something that we're working on right now. As Tritium mentioned, it's a fast evolving space about the directions and the sizes and the denominations of these various bribes and rewards and airdrops. So we need to be able to access all of that and then get it back to users. And do we distribute it directly to them? Do we do some other action with staking or something like that and distribute it to them? Or do we sell it for the underlying CVX and redeposit? There's pros and cons to all of those. And as Tritium said, like if you're a smaller user, you would probably just prefer the auto compounding or maybe just receiving more Badger and giving up those tokens. Because if you're only receiving $100 of some token to claim it and sell it yourself, unless you already hold that token, you're going to have to spend $75 anyway. So that's just not going to be of good value to you. So we got to figure out kind of what we're doing with the assets, and then also make sure that we're claiming all the assets, which is a technical question that we're digging into to make sure that, okay, which assets should we have rights to? Where are they? How do we claim them? When do we claim them? So we can be very clear with the community is, okay, you're going to deposit here at this interval. We're going to go harvest, these rewards or these assets, and we're going to do X, Y, Z with them. They'll be distributed directly to you or we'll auto compound. So that's base layer one. We need to get as close as possible as we can to matching at default just all of the non-Badger rewards that you'd be getting, just being somewhere else. So handle that, and then that in itself is a nice product because you can just deposit. It will auto relock for you. It'll handle all of the emissions. You don't really need to worry about it, especially if it's auto compounding. It'll just grow in value in CVX, and that's you'll earn CVX curve. So that's just nice as well. To make it even better, we're going to be adding 10% just baseline yield and Badger on top. So we'll be kind of pegging the prices, marking the prices weekly to determine how much Badger to distribute. So you get an additional 10% yield on top of all of the Convex yield, all of the curve yield, all of the other token yield that's coming through. And
John,
even sorry, go ahead.
So have you done the math? Because it actually, one of the big conversations that I've been hearing is that you can get about 30% from bribes with your CVX, right? And at first we weren't thinking we were going to be there, but I think we were expecting a lot more to lock. So right now with 10% Badger and 10K CVX CRV a week, it seems to me like we're actually offering a better deal, right? And I guess that kind of depends on how much locked and people have to estimate that. But right now with the money, I think do you know how much money there'd have to be in the vault before we'd be yielding under 30%? I guess that was what I was trying to figure out.
Right. So we're in the first 2 week area, which I think we actually had higher emissions in Badger. We're not doing the 10% deal yet, but we will be doing that. And so that's obviously.
We are.
We're doing this too. Okay. Well, yeah. Either way, so that's what we're doing either now or going forward. It'll be flat, 10%. So you just clock that out, and this is on top of obviously all the CVX curve, that stuff that gets distributed, and then the other component that we're doing, and this is where kind of we start getting to the flywheel, is the CVX curve that we are the most of the deposits in the Badger platform right now are in BTC denominated Convex sets. So it's REN BTC, SBTC, TBTC, things like that, and people deposit their BTC flavors into the curve pools, take those curve pools, bring them to Badger. We take those, deposit them in Convex, and we farm the Convex in the curve, and we have some of these helper vaults and yada, yada, yada. But anyways, that's the 700 million or however much we have in TVL. A lot of that is in those Convex sets. And then on those, the Convex and curve that's being earned, we take a 20% fee for the DAO, and that goes into the treasury. So that's about half in CVX tokens, half in CVX curve tokens, which is baseline. It's just curve that's deposited into Convex. So those are the two things coming into the treasury. Obviously, we value the CVX tokens highly, and we just immediately lock those up and use them for voting, in the treasury. So those have a good purpose. The CVX curve tokens, we didn't have as much of a pure purpose for. So what we're actually doing is redirecting those CVX curve back to the locked vault. And this is where you get the variable yield. So out of the gate for the first 13 weeks, we're actually using all of the CVX curve that we accumulated over the past 3 months or so that we have had the Convex vaults live, and redistributing that and just giving it to the CVX, the locked CVX vault, and that's going to be at 10,000 CVX curve per week going to that vault, distributed evenly to everyone that's deposited in it. So that's where you get variable yield. And I think, it's at 10,000. I did the math.
Just to make it easy, I'm looking at it right now. And again, this is based on prices, but there's 4.3 million in the vault, and there's about a 48% yield in CVX CRV. So if we were to double that, right, let's say we're at 10 million, right, you're still over 20% in CVX CRV plus the 10% Badger. So it's kind of like, up to about 10 or 15 million in deposits, right? 2 weeks from now, until 2 weeks from now, this is going to just be a good deal. And then 2 weeks from now, we're still actually yielding higher than the current Vodium yield.
Right. And it's in assets that you like. It's in, hopefully you like Badger, but this, even if you take Badger out of it, we're still doing okay comparatively. And it's in CVX curve, which is the main asset that you're earning yield on by being in Convex. So, and it's sustainable. It's 13 weeks down the line. And then we'll be continuing to distribute accrued CVX, which we're continuing to pull in from performance fees into it.
We've made this what we think is a super attractive vault. It's got really nice rewards that we're reinvesting into it, and we're giving Badger on top, and we're allowing people to withdraw after the 16-week locking period. So there is some liquidity. It's not permanently locked. And so we think this is going to be a very attractive place for especially smaller CVX holders, where it's not going to be gas efficient for them to harvest every bribe that's going to kill their ROI. So it's good to just kind of deposit in this vault and chill. And so now, what are we going to do with this CVX? What is Badger going to vote for, and how is that? That's kind of like step 2 of the flywheel. So what are we going to do with this CVX voting power, and how is it going to affect users?
Right. So I consider there's 2 core parts of the flywheel where basically you can get exclusive yield, or there's a clear benefit to being a Badger that you can't get anywhere else. So for this, for the Convex side of things, it's for the locked Convex vault, we have this extra flow CVX curve that's sustainable, that will keep, flowing in. And, maybe people can keep bribing on Vodium for a long period of time and keeping high yields there. But, I think a lot of us don't think that's super sustainable, because a lot of tokens are getting thrown at it and it's a little tricky. But where, as long as we have a lot of Convex deposits, we'll have, a good flow of assets coming in. So what we'll then use that for is obviously voting with that Convex vote weight that's in that locked vault, assuming that's able to grow because of that higher yield. We'll use that to then vote for those very same pools. So all the pools that Badger has, we'll be voting for those and driving the yield on those pools upwards. Specifically, we'll be gearing an overweighted amount of that vote towards pools that are components in ibBTC. So namely right now, that's SBTC and RenBTC. And we'll adjust our voting strategy to try to be as efficient as we can with those assets, and be cognizant of what other teams may be voting for to try to keep things high. But what that does is then drives higher yield to all of those vaults, and hopefully grows the TVL, which TVL itself already drives more CVX curve performance fees, which will go back into the voting product. So that in and of itself is a nice little boon before we even get to the ibBTC part.
Just to throw this out there, so just going back to understanding. So the way I see it, if people get it and everything works, then we should end up with 2 million or so Convex locked, right? Because that's competitive with the market, and even gas everything else aside, one would hope that we can get there. If you look, the last vote, things aren't getting that much more than that on Convex. So with 2 million Convex, we should be able to max 1 or 2 pools up to max rewards, right? And being that we're farming a few pools, right, that's kind of really all we need to make sure that at least somewhere in DeFi, there's really good yields on Bitcoin.
Right. And we can, we have moved ibBTC to more managed product, where we did a rebalance recently, and we're starting to kind of think of it more holistically. So we'll be aligning the allocation of the vault weight within ibBTC in alignment with our voting to try to optimize the yield flowing through to it there. And that's where we get to kind of this other component, if we're okay moving in that direction now, where it's another focus on Badger exclusive yield, Badger exclusive benefits with ibBTC, and that came through BIP 68, where we have this whole partnership focus. We don't auto dump all the tokens. We have, for all the Convex vaults, we're selling 20% of the yield generated, which is denominated in Convex and Curve, and we're selling that for Bitcoin. And right now, that's part of it goes to the treasury, part of that's auto compounded for users. And with BIP 68, we made a change where the problem was that ibBTC wasn't receiving any rewards at that point, because ibBTC is only Bitcoin denominated, and the idea is that it needs to be everywhere. It needs to be on all chains. We need to have deep liquidity. We want it to be used as collateral. And to do all of that, it's very hard to track ownership and then redistribute tokens that are being earned by ibBTC to all the users of it. So what we're doing is we're going to shift kind of the model so that all of our selling capacity, the 20% selling capacity for our partner tokens, is distributed towards ibBTC and used to sustain higher yield in ibBTC. But at each harvest, at each time that we're getting these, accumulating these reward tokens for depositors, they get redistributed to all the holders. And ibBTC is one of those holders, and it's always going to be a large holder of the various vault tokens. And it will, how it's structured in the proposal is that it'll have some retention now of its value accrued, but it'll be lower than 100%. So I think the initial launch percentage will be 60%. So if ibBTC is accumulating, $10,000 worth of Convex and Curve in one harvest, $4,000 of that will actually just go and be redistributed amongst all vault depositors. And then in return, ibBTC receives that extra, that $6,000 worth is all in Bitcoin form, and then is injected and compounded into ibBTC. So the high level of how it shakes out is that ibBTC gets a lot higher yield than it currently has, which is, it's very, very low yield right now because there's barely any, Bitcoin flowing back into it. It's a lot higher yield than it is now. It can tap into these token yields. All other vault depositors, they're going to have higher yield overall, but then the percentage of their yield that they're getting in Bitcoin will be variable. And to skew that more in their favor, the treasury now will only receive, for Convex sets, performance fees in tokens. It won't receive any performance fees in Bitcoin denomination. So as in the current environment, vault depositors will actually earn a higher percentage of rewards in Bitcoin, but that can actually track to zero if ibBTC gets really big relative to all vault depositors. I think if it's grits over, if over 50% of all vault deposits are in ibBTC, then default users won't have any auto compounding, but they'll be earning an extra 2 or possibly even more percentage yield than they would for just depositing into Convex themselves. Or doing anything else. So that, it starts covering, more than covers all performance fees. It can, quickly cover all the, any withdrawal fee. And, it's stuff that you can only get at Badger. So we're hoping that, we can get decent yield in ibBTC, get a large. All that does is generate more and more extra yield for vault depositors that you can only get at Badger, which, that in and of itself will then drive more vault depositors and drive more CVX Curve performance fees that we can pump back into the locked Convex vault. And the rewards that Tritium's talking about, that 10,000 that we're putting out right now, being 48% rewards currently. Even if we double TVL, it'll still be 24%, which is still pretty solid. That's going to become variable as we kind of build out more of a model for redistributing that CVX Curve, and that can get higher and higher and higher and support larger deposits in that vault. So that's, what kind of got us all excited. And, this was not like a grand plan we all put together. I think it was the whole team contributing, spitballing on how we're going to handle ibBTC, how we're going to handle Convex and Curve. And I think actually both of the baseline ideas came from Poe for, redistributing the selling capacity for ibBTC, and also, redistributing the CVX Curve, which are kind of the two components. So, credit him on that. You won't be getting him on a podcast anytime soon, though. So I'll have to speak for him here.
So let's put it all together. Let me just kind of see if I can summarize the flywheel. And I would refer, if everyone wants to follow along with this in text form, go to badger.com/news/flywheel. This is the article that we just released today. Let me see if I can just kind of summarize it. So number one, there's governance tokens, and Convex are becoming more important in the yield ecosystem because they control the yields in Curve. So we want to get a lot of Convex. So because of that, we've created the most attractive place in DeFi, we believe, for people to park their Convex and not have to worry about voting every two weeks. They can just chill in this vault and get a nice return. We're going to use that voting power to vote for higher BTC yields in Curve, and that's going to rectify the, in the current state of affairs, Bitcoin is getting below its ratio of total about, it's punching below its weight in terms of the yield it's getting on Curve, because other protocols are doing all this voting and bribing to get yields away from Bitcoin. So we're going to help Bitcoin retrieve its rightful place in terms of yields in DeFi. And that's going to feed into not just ibBTC, but all Badger vaults. That's going to, anyone who's in Bitcoin, not just in Badger, but in DeFi in general, is going to be getting higher DeFi yields on their Bitcoin. And as these assets in Badger grow and ibBTC grow, that provides more CVX CRV, which is basically the fuel of the flywheel that's going to go back into this vault to attract more Curve. And so that vault gets more attractive, and then we begin the cycle again. Is that kind of a fair, high-level summary of the flywheel?
Right. Yeah, you said it's a Curve, but yeah, the Convex, it'll attract more Convex in there. But yeah, that's kind of how. That's the idea. Our whole place, as we've stated, for Badger from day one, is representing and pushing for more Bitcoin in DeFi. Like, it's very fractured right now. There's 900 billion or whatever market cap of Bitcoin, and only a very small amount is in DeFi. So not only do we build products for DeFi, but we're actively lobbying for and building things to support and generate that yield for Bitcoin and DeFi. So I'm not sure if any of us really saw that this was where this was going early on. You just kind of expect there to be yield, you go farm it, and yada yada yada. But it's definitely been interesting to dig into it, and then over this time also kind of create this differentiated product. I think Bitcoin is uniquely suited for having an interest-bearing derivative. I think it's hard. It would be very hard to compete like just in the interest-bearing dollar space, right? There's a lot of different dollar flavors out there. ETH is probably even harder to get yield on than Bitcoin. People use it, so it's nice to hold on to ETH because you have to use it for gas. Where Bitcoin is probably unique in that it's one of the it's a monetary focused asset that has a long track record that people want to hold. But it would be nice to have some yield on it too. So I think we're uniquely positioned there to try to make this something that can be useful. And then it's nice that, ibBTC, then the partnership kind of vault approach, and now this, taking active role in protocol governance and, taking ownership to drive yield where we want it to be. Those components finally kind of all falling into place into like an actual differentiated product, I think is what's most exciting. And it was kind of like the, I think the point of trying to get this proposal and, this description out to everybody.
Okay, so I know that we are running short of time here. So let's just do one final question for each of you, and it'll be the same question. So let's start, Tritium. So, this is kind of the latest and greatest in terms of how we are reacting in this new environment. But what do you think is next? Like, what's the next step in this 4D chess? Like, do you have any predictions for how this yield environment in DeFi, or specifically on Bitcoin, like what's going to be the next stage of this game?
I'm super excited. Like, I think we're, the game has just begun, right? And frankly, as I said, like, yield environments are chaos, right? Like, it's very unpredictable now. And as the cost of gas is going up, right, like the stability of yields are all over the place, right? And so I think Badger, like, being partner first, having taken the last month since Convex launched to be the only protocol that was like really accumulating this. And, like, our next step, which we're going to go talk about now and try to figure that out, is figure out how to like use this bribing dynamic to really like flex what we can do in order to show people, in order to convince people that like, yeah, like we want them to do it, and slowly kind of move things away from that. But if we can get this all right, then potentially like we are in a position to make Bitcoin one of the only tokens, right, that has a stable yield environment on DeFi, and move from kind of Bitcoin being, this second class citizen to, like 3-pool, or to, like some very stable dollar pools, to a situation where actually maybe the yields in those pools are like less stable than Bitcoin, right? And we've got like really solid returns. And so like if we can get there, right, then not only can like Bitcoin users play DeFi, but DeFi users can play with Bitcoin, right? And like, I don't know, I actually really like see this as a possibility that we can like bring to light in the ecosystem as an ecosystem player over the next few months. And I'm super stoked.
Yeah, I'll hop in. Yeah, I'm very excited about the opportunity as well. And I think, there are other protocols and entities that were, accumulating CVX. And I think what we're doing differently and hopefully makes it for a better long-term solution, but is definitely trickier now as we're building it in the open. We're trying to have, a product and structure around it that's still kind of in the, open source, decentralized, landscape, and building it with the community and, with Convex and Vodium and all the other players, and trying to be, partnership first, work with everybody and, take feedback from our users and take feedback from Convex users and things like that. And I think that's a different approach than, I think some protocols were just like, oh, we're going to use money from the treasury and buy a bunch of it. And they're probably able to do that because, they, the people that are running the protocol have, pretty broad control over over those things. Where, we looked into doing that, and, how do we get it, voted and approved and, executed? And we're trying to stay committed to this, community first approach. And it definitely makes some things harder, but hopefully it's, good for the long term. So, I'm very,
sorry, just to wrap on that, because that excites me a lot. But, like at the beginning of this podcast, I was talking about how there's a lot of people that don't have the money to play the game, right? But they're super interested in it. So to me, like, I see this as like, like what's happening in Convex land is there's a bunch of power players, right? Like playing this big money game. And Badger is entering with big money, but it's big money that is held not by Badger, but by Badger holders, right? And that is being utilized and discussed and governed not by a team, but by Badger holders, right? And so to a certain extent, if we play our cards right, we're also like creating a place where people that don't have the money to play the game can come participate in governance and understand the game and be part of a DAO that like is very prominent.
Yeah. And just to wrap this up, I mean, I personally put some CVX in this and had not been a CVX holder before, not financial advice, yada, 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 but I'm just like trying to reconstruct my thought process, right? Like one of the things that I appreciate about this is, and I think it's kind of redounds to what Badger is doing, is like, I like that Badger is creating vaults that don't make me have to think about what I'm going to do. So like, to me, that was like the selling point. Like it's almost a feature to me that this is going to be locked up and I don't have to think about it. Because it's just like one more thing that I don't have to think about in my day, right? Like to have this token and then think every 2 weeks, what's the optimal voting strategy? It's just, I don't need another job, right? Like, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate that it kind of vibes with Badger's long-term approach. Like it's not, trying to respond, to be the first to respond, but it's kind of taking a step back and seeing what's happening in the environment and trying to develop something that is going to work not just this week, but, months or, God help us, years from now in DeFi in the next epoch. So anyway, thanks for joining me. I hope this is the first of many conversations about this kind of stuff. So this is going to, I believe, show up on the Badger YouTube channel. So if you're hearing this there, please, like and subscribe. And we're going to try to wrangle Tritium and Jonto and other members of the team up to have more chats like this as we have interesting topics to go over. So thank you both very much. And we'll talk to you next time.